It was the winter of 2018, and I'd taken a rare break from my job as a freelance photographer to spend the holidays in a rented cabin deep in the Canadian Rockies. My sister Elena had convinced me to join her and her husband Tom for what she called a reconnecting retreat. We'd grown distant after our parents passed, and this seemed like a chance to mend things amid the snow-covered pines and frozen lakes. The cabin was isolated miles from the nearest town with no cell service unless you hiked to a ridge, and the only sounds were the occasional crack of branches under heavy snow or the distant howl of wind through the valleys. At first, the solitude felt like a bomb-crisp air biting at my cheeks. During daytime walks, the scent of pine resin mingling with wood smoke from the fireplace, and evenings spent sipping hot cider while the fire popped and danced shadows across the log walls. The first few days were idyllic. We'd bundle up in thick wool coats and scarves, trudging through knee-deep drifts to gather fallen branches for kindling, our breaths forming misty clouds that hung in the still air. Elena, ever the optimist, decorated the place with strings of fairy lights she'd packed, their soft glow reflecting off the frost-laced windows like tiny stars trapped in ice. Tom, a quiet engineer by trade, busied himself chopping wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing through the trees. I captured it all on my camera, the way the sunlight filtered through evergreens, turning the snow into a glittering blanket, or the steam rising from our mugs as we laughed about old family stories. But as the days shortened and the nights stretched longer, a subtle unease began to creep in, like the slow chill that seeps through layers no matter how warmly you're dressed. It started on the fourth night, just after dusk had swallowed the landscape in shades of deep blue and gray. We were inside, the cabin's warmth a stark contrast to the sub-zero temperatures outside, where the mercury had dipped to a bone-numbing -20. Elena was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot of venison stew, the rich, gamey aroma filling the space and making my stomach rumble. Tom lounged by the fire, flipping through a dog-eared novel, while I sorted through photos on my laptop, the screen's blue light casting eerie highlights on our faces. That's when I first heard it, a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood, coming from the back porch. I paused, tilting my head, but dismissed it as the wind shifting snow against the railing. The cabin was old, after all, creaking and settling like an ancient body in the cold. But the sound persisted, irregular and deliberate, growing just loud enough to cut through the crackle of the flames. Tom noticed it too, his brow furrowing as he set down his book. "Probably a deer or something rummaging for scraps," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Elena glanced over from the stove, her spoon hovering mid-stir, a flicker of concern in her eyes. We all listened as the scraping evolved into a rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code, echoing against the wooden planks. The temperature inside seemed to drop, despite the fire, and I felt a prickle along my spine, the kind that comes from being watched through a window you can't see into. Curiosity won out over caution. I grabbed a flashlight from the hook by the door, its beam cutting a sharp path through the dim interior, and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit like a slap, stealing my breath and stinging my exposed skin. Snowflakes swirled lazily in the air, catching the light like tiny ghosts. At first, I saw nothing, just the unbroken white expanse stretching toward the dark wall of trees, the faint outline of our footprints from earlier that day already softening under fresh powder. Then, movement caught my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the falling snow. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a tattered parka that hung loosely on his frame, his face shadowed under a hood crusted with ice. He wasn't moving toward us, just standing there, arms limp at his sides, as if he'd been waiting for someone to notice him. I called out, my voice muffled by the wind. "Hey, you okay out there?" "Need help?" No response. The tapping had stopped the moment I'd opened the door, leaving only the hush of the forest. Elena appeared behind me, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "Who is that?" she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. Tom joined us, peering into the night, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The man didn't acknowledge us. He simply turned and shuffled back into the trees, his steps crunching faintly until the sound faded entirely. We exchanged uneasy glances, the stew's savory smell now cloying in the tense air. "Probably a hiker who got turned around," Tom said, though we all knew the trails were closed this time of year, buried under feet of snow. That night sleep evaded me. The cabin's walls groaned under gusts of wind, and every creak sounded like footsteps circling the perimeter. I lay in my bunk, staring at the wooden beams overhead, the fairy light's glow pulsing faintly through the cracks in the door. Around midnight, the tapping returned, this time from the side window near my bed. It was softer, more insistent, like fingers drumming impatiently. I sat up, heart pounding, and shone my flashlight through the glass. The beam revealed nothing but swirling snow and the black voids between trees. But as I watched, a handprint appeared on the frosted pane, melting through the ice from the outside, as if someone had pressed their palm there moments before. It was large, with long fingers splayed wide, the heat of skin leaving a ghostly outline that slowly refroze. Panic clawed at my chest. I woke Elena and Tom, whispering urgently as we huddled in the main room, the fire reduced to glowing embers that cast long, wavering shadows. "We should drive into town tomorrow, report this," Elena suggested, her voice trembling slightly, the stew long forgotten and congealing on the stove. Tom nodded, stoking the fire until it roared back to life, the heat doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in our bones. We barricaded the doors with chairs and spent the rest of the night in uneasy vigil, the wind howling like a distant scream. Dawn brought a deceptive calm, the sun glinting off fresh snow that blanketed everything in pristine white. But as we prepared to leave, we discovered the SUV's battery was dead-drained overnight, the hood dusted with undisturbed powder, no signs of tampering yet an unmistakable sabotage. No tracks led to or from the vehicle, only our own from the previous day, half erased by the storm. The isolation hit harder then. The nearest road was a 2-hour hike through drifts that could swallow a person whole. Tom tried jump-starting it with cables from the cabin's generator, but nothing worked. Elena paced, her boots scuffing the floorboards, the scent of stale coffee hanging in the air as we debated our options. By midday, the tapping resumed, now accompanied by a low whistle like someone mimicking a bird call, but off-key and mocking. It came from different directions, circling the cabin, forcing us to dart from window to window, peering out into the blinding glare. That's when we saw him again, closer this time, leaning against a tree trunk just beyond the porch. His face was visible now, hollow cheeks etched with frostbite scars, eyes sunken and unblinking, fixed on the cabin with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He raised a hand in a slow wave, his lips curving into a thin smile that didn't reach those dead eyes. Terror built like a snowball rolling downhill. We armed ourselves with what we had, the axe from the woodpile, a kitchen knife, even a heavy cast iron poker from the fireplace. The whistling grew louder, interspersed with knocks that rattled the windows, vibrating through the walls and into our chests. Elena whispered that she felt eyes on her even inside, as if the stranger knew our every move. Tom ventured out briefly to check the generator, the crunch of his steps echoing unnaturally loud. But he returned pale, swearing he'd seen shadows flitting between the trees more than one, perhaps a group lurking just out of sight. As evening fell, the assault intensified. The door shook with forceful pounds, the wood splintering slightly under the impact, sending shards flying inward like icy needles. We backed into the bedroom, hearts racing, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear sweat. I clutched my camera like a talisman, snapping frantic photos through the cracks, capturing blurred shapes in the twilight. The whistling turned to guttural hums vibrating the glass, building to a crescendo that drowned out our panicked breaths. Then, silence abrupt and deafening, broken only by the distant wail of what sounded like an approaching vehicle. Help arrived in the form of a park ranger's truck, summoned by a neighbor we'd radioed earlier via the cabin's emergency kit. The ranger found no one, just deep boot prints encircling the property, leading off into the wilderness where they scattered like veins in the snow. He chalked it up to desperate poachers or vagrants seeking shelter, but his eyes betrayed doubt as he examined the deliberate sabotage. We evacuated that night, crammed into his vehicle, the cabin receding in the rearview like a bad dream. The ordeal left scars. Elena and Tom drifted apart soon after. The shared trauma a wedge rather than a bond, and I haven't picked up my camera for landscapes since, the beauty forever tainted by that lurking dread. Years later, the memory still haunts me on winter nights, the tapping echoing in my mind like a warning. What chills me most is wondering if they were ever truly gone, or if they wait in the shadows of forgotten places, patient as the falling snow. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and crave more vivid and terrifying stories to keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel right now. We've got plenty more where that came from.